Hey everybody, I'm joined today by Dr. Bear. Dr. Bear is one of the affidavit writers who are going to be backing up this case against this unconstitutional ban. Um, Hi, Dr. Bear. Please introduce yourself to everybody watching.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jesse. I'm Daniel Baer, and I'm a professor in the criminal justice program at Humber College in Toronto.
And I reached out to you recently to help me with an affidavit, and you're actually telling me how you first came to be with cannabis and studying cannabis. I'd love for you to tell that story.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been doing work in cannabis policy since about 2003 or 2004. But I actually got interested in studying cannabis because back in 1998, I was 16 and I got jumped and really severely injured. Just my face was just crushed. And I was given a lot of opiates, as was standard practice in the 90s, and it really caused me more problems than good. A lot of side effects with the opiates, and it wasn't until a friend actually said, "Hey, do you want to smoke some weed?" That I actually began to get a bit of relief from the pain, and I could actually go to school. And it was amazing. I didn't know who. I couldn't tell anybody what was going on. I couldn't really talk about it. I was in California, and we just passed medical marijuana laws a couple years before, but I didn't even understand to think about it like that. All I had been told was that drugs were bad, and I was so conflicted because here cannabis was helping me, and yet the messaging that I was getting my whole life was that this was a bad thing and was going to harm me. And I realized I needed to understand this better. If this thing was helping me, and I couldn't talk to people around me, I could at least look at the literature, at the research, and things like that. And I dove in then, and I've been fortunate in my career. I studied a lot of different aspects of cannabis. I worked with medical cannabis patients at a farm in Santa Cruz, California, looking at how they work together to grow their cannabis and the sense of community they created from it. I've done a lot of work on policing and criminalization of cannabis, particularly around racial disparities and disproportionality and how that's carried out. I spent a year with police in London, in the UK, looking at how they conducted drug raids and drug arrests. But I've also done a lot of work around how young people engage with cannabis and actually react and respond to the public education messaging that's out there. So, I've been fortunate to really study cannabis from a lot of different angles. And I think I realized a long time ago that, this rabbit hole really had no end that I could see, and I might as well keep crawling and seeing where it led me. And it's made for a very interesting and rewarding career to try and shed light on something that for so long during Prohibition was just sort of seen as not worthy of real engagement and study.
So you've been involved in cannabis for over 18 years. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, as a patient for a couple of years there, and then I formed a chapter of Students for Sensible Drugs Policy at UC Santa Cruz in 2003 when I was there. And since then, I've been in cannabis and drugs policy since then.
So when Canada decided to go federal legalization, was that a big turning point? And were
Oh
you
my
were you
God,
involved?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm originally from the U.S. and I studied for my PhD in the U.K. And my wife and I made the decision. She's Canadian. We made the decision to come to Canada, and a couple of years later, they legalized, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" Um, and it's definitely had its problems. And, it's had its hiccups. I wouldn't say it's been the smoothest rollout ever, but to be here as we change the paradigm, as we move forward, and try and do something that for 100 years has been stigmatized and prohibited, and to say we're going to figure this out, and so that the rest of the world can see how to go about doing it, maybe the same as us, maybe differently. It's been a real amazing opportunity, and I've just been so happy to be able to be part of it. The highlight of my career actually was that on legalization day, I got to be on the BBC when they did a story about Canada's legalizing cannabis today. I was the person they talked to, and just to be able to be on the BBC, on one of the biggest news broadcasters in the world, and say, yes, we're legalizing cannabis today, and here's what it looks like. That was just such an amazing feeling to be telling the world about Canada's massive step forward.
Yeah, it's definitely been quite the ride over the last 2 years with legalization.
Yeah,
So the
not a
question
smooth ride, but a ride.
yeah, it's you know I with certain laws that were put in place and certain guidelines, I get it. It was like 2 years ago, it was a brand new thing. People were a little nervous about it, but I do hope to see loosening of certain regulations as people start to realize a lot of the negatives they thought would happen haven't happened over the last 2 years. So it,
Particularly, yeah, I didn't always agree with all of the policy decisions. I think that the task force chaired by Anne McClellan, I think they did a really solid job looking through the issues. I didn't agree with all of their findings, recommendations, and in the final legislation. I understand a lot of it, even if I don't agree with it, I can see sort of the logic behind the people doing it. I think, unfortunately, putting people necessarily who aren't familiar with cannabis, Bill Blair leading the drive through Parliament. I think he's familiar from cannabis only from one angle, and while they did listen to a lot of people during the parliamentary testimony, I think leadership on that kind of issue. Um, I can see why you needed a police officer to keep people on board with the idea, but I don't think it necessarily resulted in the best outcomes. But thankfully, there is a review built into the Cannabis Act in 2021. And a lot of the research that I'm engaged in is really focused on being able to contribute to that review.
so what are your most current initiatives in the cannabis space?
So I've got two research projects going on right now, which I think are really interesting. The first is called Engaging and Educating Young Adult Cannabis Consumers. And we're looking at young people 18 to 30 in Canada. And we're asking them what kind of public education messaging they've seen, what they like, what they don't like, and how they respond to it, and seeing who they would want to turn to and what kind of messages they would want to engage with. Because I grew up under Just Say No and the DARE programs and things like that. And, as I said, I didn't really know anything about cannabis when it came to me actually using it medically. And I think we can do a lot better for young people. Cannabis is not a harmless drug. It is minimally harmful, but it is not totally harmless, just like no product really is. And I think if we can engage people with honest, truthful information that's science-based and that resonates with them, that doesn't try to scare them, uses messages that they understand and want to connect with, I think we can do a lot of good and create a cannabis space where people are using cannabis with knowledge and being able to make decisions about what works for them, what's safest for them, and what products or methods they want to use, and understanding the various risk patterns that are associated with that. The other big project that I'm involved in, which I think might be really of interest to your followers and to your group, is I'm part of the Global Cannabis Cultivation Research Consortium. And we're a group of 16 or 17 countries. And we've launched the world's largest cannabis cultivation survey. And we're trying to understand patterns and practices of cannabis cultivation around the world. The survey first ran in 2012. And we had, I think, about 4,000 or 5,000 respondents that first time. We're currently running the survey, and it's going to stay open through the end of February, I'm pretty sure. And we're getting a lot of insight. And we've built it not just to understand, okay, are you using hydroponics, or are you using, soil, indoor, outdoor, but we're really delving into it. What strains are you growing? Why are you growing them? What are you doing with the stuff that you grow? How much are you getting even per plant? What are you doing with it? How do you store it? What kind of policy reforms do you want to see enacted? So we're really trying to give growers a voice, because let's be frank, under prohibition in particular, and even under legalization now, governments aren't really asking growers, why are you growing and what are you doing with it? Under prohibition, it was like, okay, we busted somebody growing some plants, but nobody ever thought to say, well, what are you doing with these plants? Why did you feel the need to grow? And what we know is that, a lot of times medical patients in particular need to grow cannabis because they aren't able to find the types of medicine in the formats or the strengths of the strains that work best for them. And that only comes out because of research like this. So that project, I think, is really interesting and really the only one of its kind around the world.
And I can throw that link in the description so people can go to the survey and fill it out.
Yeah, we'd really appreciate it. Canada and Uruguay, the two countries with legal cannabis, are both participants in this. I'm leading the Canadian side with Dr. David Martin Millot at the University of Sherbrooke. And we are we are falling way behind. Tiny little Belgium has about 1,000 more responses than we do right now. So we need Canadians to step up and show what legalization looks like. Sorry, show what growing looks like under legalization.
Well, come on, Canada, check out the link in the description, and let's get on Belgium's heels there. Um, when we were initially talking, you had actually brought up an interesting point about what majority people are doing with the cannabis they grow, and kind of contradicts one of the arguments here in Manitoba. So I was hoping you could touch on that.
Yeah, for sure. So the cannabis cultivation project that I worked on, as I mentioned, we ran the first round in 2012, and the research on that shows that most people who are small scale growers of cannabis are not contributing it to the black market. They're not selling it for profit. They're not selling other drugs. They tend to be growing it for themselves and doing maybe a bit of social supply. So giving away or giving at cost to friends and family. It's not really flooding into the black market. In that when we think about what supplies the legacy market, it's large scale grow operations that take over a whole house or a whole field, somewhere in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, where you can kind of get 60 kilometers away from the closest person, and it's things like that where there's large scale grow operations that feed the legacy market, and the concern about small scale growers, particularly for plants. I mean, let's be honest, you can harvest a lot of bud off of 4 well-grown plants, but it's not the kind of situation where people are doing that. And the cannabis legacy market is not a bunch of like piecemeal small 4 plant farmers all feeding into some large stream. I'm sure a couple of people do that, and a few people here and there will, but that's not what the legacy market is built upon.
Well, I'm very excited to see that in the affidavit, and among other things, because you bring such credibility and experience to this case, and I know every Manitoban who wants to grow is going to be very thankful that you've taken this affidavit on. Do you have a message to Manitobans as they wait to grow?
For sure, yeah. I think being denied the opportunity to grow 4 plants, whether you think 4 plants was the right number or should have been done on a square meter basis or whatever, being denied the ability to do something that the government has said is similar and should be regulated, similar to alcohol. In fact, if you look at our Cannabis Act, it is very similar to the Tobacco Act in nature. It has a lot of the same principles at play that we think about with alcohol. And yet there's this major difference that Manitoba and Quebec as well, but Quebec says start to fall by the wayside. They've picked up this idea that there's something wrong with the growing of cannabis. And I just don't understand that thought process. It's okay if people consume it, but God forbid they grow it a bit. I mean, at the same time, it's like I've had some amazing homebrewed beers, and I never thought, my God, what happens if the carboy breaks and you spill 5 gallons all over your basement floor? Like, I'm sure that could happen, but that's not really the main issue there. So I hope that Manitobans get the opportunity to legally grow their cannabis in the near future, and that they can, that way more freely participate in the kinds of surveys we're running now. Although I will just add that the survey that we are running about cannabis growing, total anonymity is provided. We don't track IP addresses. We don't do anything like that. Our website doesn't even keep visitor log. We get rid of those constantly so that there's no tracking of anybody visiting our site. So if you are growing illicitly in Manitoba or really anywhere in Canada, we do still invite you to participate. We don't ask any personal information. And in fact, where there's opportunities to type in information, we screen that no personal information was accidentally entered there. So we take your privacy and your security very seriously. But yeah, I hope the Manitobans get the chance to grow soon. A lot of the concern around growing seems to be around like mold and other stuff and issues in your house. And my whole thing is like, well, that seems like a very small problem and one that is not necessarily the actual main concern there. So, I hope and wish you good luck and hope that this court case proceeds and is successful, because there's no reason that Manitoba should be this holdout amongst the territories and provinces of Canada.
You said it best, and I'm sure some people might say that you said it better than I ever have. So, thank you very much for doing this interview, and I'm sure everyone, especially the Manitoba government, is going to enjoy reading your affidavit. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, Jesse.
Thank you.